The topic of violence in video games is a debate that attracts a lot of controversies, but it is not something that will be resolved anytime soon. Nowadays, the focus is largely on the console games and the violent content in them, but this is a practice that has been prevalent since the times of the good old arcade games from the 80s and 90s. While the parents might be concerned about the games their children are playing today, our childhood was usually spared from the scrutiny because few people actually knew what these arcade games were up to. In this video, I will bring you a collection of some of the underrated violent arcade games that got away with just about anything in the absence of a strict censor system. Honestly, I didn't mind because it only made my childhood more entertaining. Chiller. This light gun arcade game was released by Exidy back in 1986, but the memory is still fresh for people like me who spent hours on this one. The concept of the game was bizarre, to say the least, and the player had to take on the role of an unseen torturer who had to maim and mutilate and murder the restrained non-player characters in a wide variety of dungeon settings. Some of the NPCs could fight back, and the challenge of the gameplay was to figure out a way to quickly cause the victims to die. The game comprised of 4 main levels: the torture chamber, the rack room, the haunted house hallway, and the graveyard, and each of these levels provided a memorable experience. You could also unlock a final bonus round, which mainly consisted of target practice and objects moving at increasing high speeds had to be shot. You can imagine from the basic premise of the game that it was extremely violent and came up with a concept that was hard to imagine back then. The critics came out with some harsh words for the senseless violence in the game that they claimed would encourage torture and murder tendencies. The first 2 levels of the game featured seemingly human NPCs who were restrained by medieval torture devices, and the player had to discover ways to kill these characters in the shortest possible amount of time. You could simply shoot them to death, but the process was not very efficient because direct shots only resulted in chunks of flesh blown away with the victims still alive. After the first couple of levels, you could kill paranormal creatures like ghosts, zombies, and mummies. While the game was innovative without a doubt, it was not among the best sellers during the time because the arcade owners refused to purchase it for its objectionable content. That being said, Exidy did market it quite successfully to developing nations. Speaking purely in terms of the gaming experience, it was a rather complete video game with minimal flaws, and you couldn't possibly ask for anything better back in the mid-80s. Blood Warrior. This game was called Ohido Fight in Japan, and it was a fighting arcade game that quickly caught the fancy of the gamers. It was actually a successor to the 1992 fighting arcade game called Shogun Warriors, and the developers were also the same on both instances. The game featured 9 playable characters inspired by Japanese mythology and historical figures, and they included samurai, ninjas, and mythical beings, each with distinct moves and personalities. The gameplay involved a 4-button layout with punches, kicks, and special attacks, and the game also allowed multiple air attacks per jump, with special moves like the stun mechanic. What really changed from the earlier Shogun Warriors was the inclusion of digitized images of real actors within the game, and this was different from the traditionally drawn sprites. Also, the addition of blood and gore drew parallels with Midway's extremely popular Mortal Kombat franchise. Blood Warrior unfolded in a fairly linear manner, and you had to complete the fights. The gameplay wasn't always perfect, and it was unbalanced at times with iffy collision detection. The innovative graphics ensured a more lifelike and theatrical experience, and the attention was always on the animated gore and fighters. I loved the heavy metal soundtrack that added to the gritty setting of the game. The game was fairly popular in Japan, but it did not feature among the most popular arcade games during the time because the competition was fierce. Overall, it is safe to say that Blood Warrior was a cult classic that brought in a lot of innovation, even though it was not one of the top-tier fight games from the era. Beastbusters. This was a rail shooter horror game released by SNK for arcades back in 1989, but the game was ahead of its time. It was the first 3-player light gun shooter game, and the story is featured in an alternate timeline in the year 1990X. It starts off with a strange case of dead people coming back to life, and these entities are called beasts. They are extremely violent and attack the living, and the mayor of the city is forced to offer a massive reward to anybody who can solve the mystery. The unprecedented incident leads to a major outbreak, and it needs to be contained immediately, and 3 heavily armed bounty hunters step into the beast-infested city. Can Johnny, Paul and Sammy get the job done with a side of some violent and uncontrolled bloodshed? You bet they can. You could take control of one of these characters in the game, and the mission was to discover the cause of the bizarre outbreak and shoot your way out of the city. The original arcade experience was unique, as 3 players could play the game at the same time. The guns mounted on the machine looked like machine guns, and one had to shoot their way through 7 sections. In between the stages, the cutscenes explained the events of the zombie infestation, and the boss fights were super intense. I particularly liked the stage that required the player to rescue a female CIA agent from the stage's boss. It quickly became a smashing hit in Japan, and even in North America, it did very good business. It has been reported that the king of pop, Michael Jackson, owned a Beastbusters arcade machine and even took it with him on tour. A sequel was released later in 1999 on the Hyper Neo Geo 64, but the charm of the original remains untouched. Zombie Raid. The zombie genre was yet to become an integral part of pop culture, even though there have been some amazing movies and shows already. Zombie Raid was a nice addition to the video game lore of zombies as an intense screen-scrolling, horror-themed light gun shooter released for the arcade by American Sammy. The story of Zombie Raid is premised in 1918 England, where a small village is troubled by kidnappings and cases of grave robberies. Soon, heavily armed zombies start to emerge, and the police struggle to contain the situation. Meanwhile, a private investigator, Edward Windsor, starts to investigate, and together with a man named Charles, infiltrates a nearby castle, which is the origin of the zombies. Slowly, the mystery behind the zombie outbreak is revealed, and it turns out to be a mad monster scientist behind all the chaos. In the final moments of the game, you have to fight him in a monstrous avatar, and your win means that the village can now live in peace. Is this the best shooter action game from the 90s? Well, the answer is no, because it is not even close. While the gameplay is fun and unique, there were much better games during the time, which left this out as the underrated one in the genre. You had a pump-action shotgun mounted on the arcade cabinet, and it combined shooting with a physical pump-to-reload mechanic. The players faced a variety of hideous enemies, and the gameplay also required you to not hit the innocent bystanders, which would otherwise cause a health penalty. The graphics were decent and detailed, but the game used chunky sprites and digitized backgrounds to perfect the grim ambience. The heavy gore and cheesy bits like exploding zombies and flying organs were hard to miss. It could be a bit too difficult to master, but once you got the hang of it, the game ensured hours of uninterrupted fun.
Under Fire.
Under Fire. This light gun shooter by Taito was often said to be similar to Konami's Lethal Enforcers, but we the gamers weren't complaining, because both were awesome. The story of the game is set in a metropolitan city overwhelmed by a ruthless criminal gang called the Hoppers. The situation has deteriorated to the point that the regular police force cannot control the crime wave. The mayor calls in a special police unit, equipped with submachine guns, who fight tirelessly to reclaim the city from the Hoppers' grip. Players take on the role of these special operatives dedicated to justice and charged with saving the city. The game features a faster pace compared to similar light gun games like Konami's Lethal Enforcers, with continuous enemy threats and minimal downtime. Players can collect full auto rapid-fire power-ups and use a secondary shotgun blast button for crowd control. Each stage ends with a boss fight featuring unique gang leaders who use cover and aggressive attacks. It delivers a fast, intense light gun shooting experience with a simple but effective cops versus gang storyline. Its infrared gun technology and rapid gameplay speed make it stand out from contemporaries. While it shares similarities with other shooters of the time, it balances challenge with player-friendly features, creating a memorable arcade shooter for fans of the genre. I don't think there are many who hate this game, even though it does have a few shortcomings. Such is the kind of entertainment on offer. Line of Fire. Sega has delivered some iconic arcade games over the years, and Line of Fire is another addition to their legacy. This first-person light gun shooter was released for arcades back in 1989, and it was released with 2 arcade cabinet versions. You have to play as a part of a 2-man commando team who have been charged with going behind enemy lines in order to take down a notorious terrorist organization. This terrorist outfit has access to a large arsenal of weaponry, so the job is not an easy one, and the team even finds a special weapon which has to be reported. The stages scrolled both horizontally and into the screen via a pseudo 3D effect, and the visuals also cleverly created the illusion of twists and turning corners. The game became increasingly popular all over the world, and it ranked up the charts with the likes of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Tecmo World Cup 90, and Super Masters. Everyone went gaga over the pseudo 3D graphics and sit-down cabinet, but some people were not too happy with its derivative gameplay that was heavily based on Operation Wolf and Operation Thunderbolt. I was a big fan of the heart-stopping action throughout the game, and the impressive graphics only made the gaming experience better. The home conversion did not do too well, but Line of Fire will still remain one of the best arcade gaming moments from the late 80s. Blood Bros. This arcade game is set in the Wild West, and the plot involves 2 blood brothers, a cowboy and a Native American, as they team up for a mission to hunt down the most wanted outlaw in Dodge City, Big Bad John, who also happens to be searching for a massive treasure. The players can control their characters from behind, using a crosshair to shoot enemies and destroy the environment. The gameplay involves shooting endless waves of hostile cowboys, Native Americans, and various enemies like bomb-throwing convicts, armoured wagons, blimps, and mounted horsemen. Players can use unlimited primary gunfire and limited dynamite sticks to clear enemies and destructible scenery like buildings, caves, and mountains. Throughout the journey, they pass through diverse levels such as waterfalls, train tracks, a besieged town, a bar fight, an oil field, and volcanic caves. Each level ends with challenging bosses that make for a stiff ask for the beginners. This vibrant, action-packed arcade shooter was known for its chaotic and explosive gameplay set in a Wild West theme. It built on the mechanics popularised by its spiritual predecessor, Cabal, featuring 2 players controlling a cowboy and a Native American in a cooperative mission to track down the outlaw. The game excelled with its destructible environments, colourful and cartoony graphics, and creative level design that includes cascading buildings, exploding trains, and blazing fiery bosses. Personally, I used to love the 2-player co-op gameplay. Also, audio elements like catchy western tunes, satisfying gunfire sounds, and voice samples enhanced the arcade atmosphere. There were some who criticised this game, but maybe they did not account for all the mindless fun that the gameplay offered. Space Gun. Space Gun is a first-person shooter arcade game set in the year 2039 aboard a crippled space station near an alien planet that has been overrun by hostile alien creatures. The player takes on the role of a special soldier responding to a distress call, aiming to rescue human crew members who have been captured by the aliens for an unknown, sinister purpose, namely reproduction by converting humans into aliens. The mission involves battling through several levels aboard the spacecraft and on the planet's surface, saving hostages and destroying the alien threat. The player uses various weapons, including a rapid fire gun and special ammo types like flamethrowers and grenades, while avoiding harming the humans and managing incoming waves of enemies. One of the most unique things about this arcade game is the use of raster graphics on a CRT monitor that provided a different style of visuals. With the concrete narrative behind the gameplay, it is not surprising that the game became the second highest-grossing arcade game of the year in Japan, and it was also a huge success in the United States. The fans of the genre loved the immersive experience offered by the game, and the cabinet design was also quite innovative. The game could be surprisingly difficult with the not-so-perfect rapid-fire weapon that needed to be recharged after prolonged use, and you had to learn your way through repetitive attempts. The graphic violence was something else entirely, with the visual effects of entrails and blood splashed against the screen, and we were in for quite a shocker as kids. I wish somebody made a modern version of this game for the contemporary consoles. Chelnov, Atomic Runner. This side-scrolling shooter platform arcade game was developed and published by Data East, and it was later ported to the Sega Genesis in 1992. The game allows you to take control of Chelnov, a coal miner who has miraculously survived the malfunction and explosion of a nuclear power plant. As a result of his exposure to the radiation, his body has gained superhuman abilities, and now a secret organization wants to harness these abilities for their own evil purposes. Chelnov has to fight and defeat the sinister organization and its minions, and his superpowers will come in handy in this struggle. One could control the movements of Chelnov with the 8-way joystick, and the character could attack, jump, or turn around. There were 6 types of weapons that could be obtained through the game, and the boss battles were nothing short of legendary. If you consider the era when the game was released, the sprite animation for the main character is extremely detailed and smooth. You can actually compare the visuals to some iconic games like the early Prince of Persia entries and Karateka. And it is unfortunate that the game had to deal with some controversies when it was released. For instance, many interpreted the game as a parody of the Chernobyl disaster, and it was deemed insensitive. The violent gameplay also received some flack, even though it was nothing out of the ordinary. Despite all these controversies, the game became extremely popular, and Sega Genesis made the smart move to change the storyline considerably to remove the connotations to Chernobyl. All in all, this was definitely an arcade game worth trying out, and the character was so popular that it appeared as an enemy character in some later games. Night Slashers. This was another of the cult classics from the House of Data East, who developed and published Night Slashers as a classic beat-em-up game for the arcades. The game was somewhat similar to Capcom's Final Fight and Sega's Streets of Rage, but we were not complaining about the similarities here. Basically, it was an archetypal side-scrolling beat-em-up, where the players could move from left to right through each level while fighting the enemy characters until they reached a stronger boss character at the end of each level. Yes, it was really as simple as that, but the horror theme and the 3 innovative characters made it a really fun experience. The game also allowed you to fight through hordes of attacking zombies and mutants, and there were other monsters like vampires featured in the gameplay as well. The bosses were memorable, and those who were lucky enough to experience the Japanese uncensored version will know just how bloody and gory the gameplay was. It became an instant hit among the action lovers, and the campy horror theme was also widely appreciated. The controls were not the best, and the game could become repetitive in today's time, but back then it was pure gold for the fun of the simplistic gameplay and memorable music that came with it. If you like the idea of the arcade game, make sure you try out the remake for major platforms including PlayStation 4 and Xbox One that was released in September. Splatterhouse. The original arcade game Splatterhouse tells the story of Rick Taylor, a parapsychology student who, along with his girlfriend Jennifer Willis, takes refuge from a storm in the infamous West Mansion, also known as Splatterhouse. It was rumoured to be the site of horrific experiments by the missing Dr. West. Upon entering, Jennifer is kidnapped, and Rick is left for dead in the mansion's dungeon. There, he is resurrected by the sentient Terror Mask, a Mayan sacrificial artifact that fuses with his body, transforming him into a monstrous being with superhuman strength. Now, empowered by the mask, Rick battles through gruesome monsters and grotesque creatures within the mansion in a desperate attempt to save Jennifer. When he finally finds her, Jennifer has been turned into a monstrous fanged creature and, unable to save her, Rick is forced to kill her in mercy as she pleads for help. Enraged, Rick pursues the remaining monsters to a massive hole in the mansion's floor, discovering the mansion itself is alive. After destroying the monstrous womb inside the house, causing it to burst into flames, Rick faces the giant resurrected monster Hell Chaos outside. After defeating Hell Chaos, the mask shatters, leaving Rick human again as the mansion burns to the ground. However, in a sinister final scene, the mask reassembles itself, hinting that the horror is not yet over. The game was visceral and gory, and the atmospheric horror was so good that I wished they turned this into a movie. It was typical 1980s B-movie style horror fun, and the characters, especially that of the protagonist, were really satisfying. Some were quick to criticize the game for its repetitive level design and repetitive gameplay, but I cannot agree with such observations. Yes, the graphics were choppy with the raw and rough pixel art style, but even that never troubled me back in the day. If you want to experience an unapologetic horror game that does not shy away from gore and violence, try revisiting this classic on your system.
Bloodstorm.
Bloodstorm. This arcade-style fighting game was developed by Incredible Technologies and published by Strata, and it was considered to be the spiritual sequel to Time Killers. The story of the game was set in a distant post-apocalyptic future where the world had been ravaged by war and famine. Well, doesn't seem so post-apocalyptic in today's context, does it? Anyway, coming back to the story, the new world had been divided into 8 provinces ruled by the High Emperor, and when the Emperor was assassinated, it brought the world to the brink of another global catastrophe. The Bloodstorm tournament was held in accordance with ancient laws of the kings and queens in the provinces to determine the next High Emperor so that the balance could be maintained. As you can tell from the game narrative, the storyboard was very impressive and immersive. Just like its predecessor, it retained the aspects like removal of an opponent's arm and the special instant kill attack. Needless to say, the gameplay was unexpectedly violent, but it was something we all enjoyed as a thrilling gaming experience as kids. There were 7 secret characters in the game who could be found depending on how you defeated the enemy. After its release, it quickly became one of the most popular arcade games of the year, even though it had tough competition from Mortal Kombat 2. Some called it a fun parody of Mortal Kombat, and they weren't really wrong about this observation. The gameplay was not perfect by any means, but it got the job done, and I wish they had a similar fighting game developed now. Marvellous verdict. Old is gold indeed. We have so many modern-day classics now, and the quality of the games has certainly gone up with all the technical advancement. The graphics and realistic visuals combined with high-end consoles and fancy controls have enhanced the gaming experience. But those who have grown up on arcade games like these will know that the nostalgia of these old classics hits hard. They really don't make games like these anymore. And what adds to the fun is the fact that these games never bothered to tone down the gameplay in order to not offend anyone. I really love the modern reboots of some arcade classics, and this just proves that the charm of these games is still not lost on the audience. Do let me know in the comments below what you think of these games, and also share your personal favourites from the list. I would love to hear about any other underrated violent arcade game that come to mind and doesn't feature in this video.